get started. Actually, let me grab my clock. We are continuing our study in Numbers tonight. So we're going to be in Numbers 6. So if you don't have a Bible on your phone, or if you just want to see one physically, you can go ahead and grab one of the Bibles from there's a few Bibles all around. We have to put those back out. So we're going to be in Numbers 6 tonight. But before we dive in, let me pray for us. We will get started. Father, thank you again for this opportunity to gather together to study your word. We thank you for the gift of your word. We thank you that you are a speaking God who has made yourself known. We pray that the same Spirit who inspired Moses to write these words would now be with us as we study them, to open our minds to understand them and our hearts to receive them, that he might even be strengthening in us that we might bring forth their fruit in our life. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we are in, like I said, Numbers chapter 6, and if you kind of remember where we are in the story up to this point. So obviously Numbers is one of the 5 books of Moses that come at the beginning of the Old Testament. So they, in that sense, they are foundational, right? The book, the Old Testament as a whole, is the story of redemption promise. You know, if you think of the story of the whole Bible as creation, fall, redemption, consummation. You get creation, fall very early on in Genesis 1, 2, and 3, and then you get consummation at the very end in Revelation 20 through 22. But then in the middle, you really have the story, the unfolding story of redemption. In the Old Testament, primarily, is the redemption promised, and then the New Testament being redemption fulfilled and applied to the church. And so the Old Testament being the story of redemption promised, the Pentateuch, those first 5 books, the books of Moses, is really the foundation, setting the scene, introducing the characters of the promised redemption. And so Numbers is part of that foundation laying. And it comes in the story after the Exodus. And so you have the introduction of the patriarchs in Genesis, then in Exodus, you have the children of the patriarchs who become a great nation brought out of Egypt by the strong hand of God under the leadership of Moses. And then in the second half of that, they're given the instructions for the tabernacle at Mount Sinai. Leviticus continues to explain the ceremonial system, basically, that will operate around and in that tabernacle. And now in Numbers, we're getting the story from that point. So they're at Sinai to the Promised Land. Of course, we know it's not going to be a simple story, because when they get to the Promised Land for the first time, they're not going to go in, and they're going to end up wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And so Numbers actually becomes the story of their wilderness wandering. That's actually the middle part of the book, chapters 15 to 25, tell the story of their 40 years of wandering in the wilderness. But Numbers is the book of transition from Mount Sinai to the Promised Land. And so it begins in a way that makes a lot of sense for us. You know, they're getting ready, they're heading towards the Promised Land, they're heading towards the conquest, and so it begins with a census of the military-age men. And so all the men of all the different tribes who are 20 years old and older are counted, and we're given those numbers in the first chapter. At the very end of the first chapter, we're told, however, that the Levites were not counted among the military men. And that's significant because the military census, the counting of each individual man, taught us, it told us that every Israelite had a role to play, that every family had a role to play in the work that God was doing of establishing his nation in the Promised Land. And that's a picture of the church. Everybody is called to participate in the establishing of the kingdom of God on earth as it is in heaven. No matter what the particulars of your vocation, no matter what the particulars of your job, you are called to be a kingdom builder. Because that's what man was created for in the beginning. It's the job we see him given in the garden before the fall. and that is what we are redeemed to. And so we see that in the census, and we see that the Levites are accepted from that military duty, not because they don't have a role to play, but because the work they have is of equal importance. That work, the establishing the kingdom only matters if it's the establishing of a worshiping kingdom. And so the Levites are there as those who are guarding the worship of the people. And that's where we're introduced in the first chapter. Then in chapter 2, we move on to see how that priority of worship actually affects both the way they camp and the way they march. And so whether they're moving or whether they're settled, the tabernacle is in the center. The tabernacle is in the center of the camp with all of the tribes around them, and the Levites actually as a buffer guarding the tabernacle. And then when they march, it's the same way. You've got some tribes out front, you've got the Levites, then you've got the tabernacle, and then you've got some more tribes. And so the tabernacle, again, is in the center, symbolizing the centrality of God's presence as the defining characteristic of the people of God. To be Israel is to be the people of God. It is to be defined by your relationship with God. And the work of the Levites and the importance of the Levites is further explained in chapters 3 and 4. And then we have this sort of strange transition in chapter 5 where the genre changes, and now we're into laws. Right? And God is commanding, hey Moses, say this to the people, command this to the people. And so we get into chapters 5 and 6, and you see over and over again the phrase that begins chapter 5. The Lord spoke to Moses saying, command the people. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people, verse 6. And verse 11. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the people. And so you see this again and again throughout chapters 5 and 6, that God is giving to the people laws. And for the English reader, I think we have to, at least at first, if we're honest, we have to admit, this seems a little arbitrary to us. Like why all of a sudden we have laws about cleanliness, and why all the laws about restitution, and the laws about tests for a jealous husband, how a wife who's suspected of adultery. It doesn't seem to flow. But as we looked at it last week in chapter 5, we began to see that really this fits perfectly well in the context of this discussion of a people in whose midst God is going to dwell. Remember, in some ways, that's what the whole book of Leviticus was about. The whole book of Leviticus was about how can a holy God dwell in the midst of a sinful people and not destroy them. How is it safe for God to live in the midst of a sinful people? And now, we see that continue here in chapter 5 as the laws about cleanliness are a reminder that cleanliness matters. You cannot dwell in the camp unless you are clean. And the laws on restitution actually are part of what those cleanliness laws are pointing to. The cleanliness laws are ceremonial, they're ritual, but they point to the need for moral purity if we're going to dwell in God's presence. So how do you deal with your sins? Well, you deal with your sins by offering the appropriate sacrifices, but by being reconciled to your neighbor and making restitution for the harm that you have done. And so there's both a horizontal and a vertical relationship to dealing with sin, to cleansing the camp of sin. And then the test about adultery again is there because it's a reminder that it is sin against God that is the problem. A husband being jealous of his wife is not enough reason to punish her. That's a husband does not have that authority. A husband does not have that right. It's God's law that matters. And so if there's not proof, if there's not certainty that the wife has violated her vows, you have to take it before the Lord through the priest in order to find out. There's this elaborate process that seems very strange to us. It seems, it does seem strange. It's old culture, and yet the wisdom of it makes sense to us when we understand that the husband's right to act in his jealousy is being curtailed, and we're saying, listen, if you don't know, you take it to the Lord. There's not 2 or 3 witnesses. You take it to the Lord. All right. And so it's in that flow that we come now to chapter 6. And the bulk of chapter 6 has to deal with Nazarites. So what do you know about Nazarites? What comes to mind when you hear about Nazarites? Samson, all right? We think of Samson. Who else? What else? Anything else? Yeah. Anyone else?
Long hair, no wine.
Long hair, yeah, long hair, right? That goes with Samson too. No wine. All right, so we kind of know some of the regulations. What are Nazarites for?
They're making a sacrifice unto the Lord.
Okay, making a sacrifice unto the Lord. All right, a sacrifice of
Resources, a show of sacrifice.
okay, a show of sacrifice. Yeah, it's a show of devotion. Yeah, and it's actually an interesting question because we're not told. The Nazarites come up here and there, and aspects of their vows show up here and there, so that we think that some people, Samson and Samuel seem to be under sort of the Nazarite regulations, but there's some irregularities with both of them. The irregularities being that the Nazarite vow is actually a voluntary vow that you take for a temporary period in your life. Both of them were dedicated by their parents for life. So even those guys don't end up following exactly the Nazarite vows. You hear about Paul taking some oaths that involved hair and stuff in Acts, and people wonder, well, are those Nazarite vows? Well, maybe, but again, we don't know. We're not told exactly, so we don't actually have a ton of information. We are told in Amos that one of the sins of the people was that they would sort of take the Nazarites to parties and get them to drink. Like getting the goody two shoes person to stumble and to break their vows like a sport in the Old Testament Israel. And so that was one of the things that God did not appreciate. And so that we know that there were still Nazarites going on in Amos's day, but again, we don't know a ton about them. One commentator refers to them as sort of the monks and the nuns of Israel. All right, and I think that's possibly appropriate, except for the fact that again, monks and nuns we tend to think of as for life. That's not what the Nazarites were, but the Nazarites were sort of devoting themselves for a season to making a special offer of themselves, really, to the service of the Lord for a certain amount of time. So we're going to look more at the Nazarite vows, but the other part of this first chapter is Aaron's blessing. All right, the Aaronic blessing you may have heard of. You've heard it, whether you've heard of it or not. You've heard it because we use it here a lot. It's the benediction that we use at the end of the worship service almost every week. Occasionally we'll use a New Testament benediction, but more often than not, we are using this benediction because this is the benediction that God Himself gives to the priests of Israel to announce upon the people of God. And so it's the benediction that we use most often here at Trinity. And so the question is, before we dive into the particulars, again, how does this fit in the big picture of what's going on here? And again, I think we can make sense of it as we did with the laws in chapter 5. That again, they pertain to how do you live in the presence of a holy God. All right, there's a place for special devotion. If you're going to devote yourself to the Lord, this is the way you have to do it. All right, and so again, you can't. At any point, we don't worship God, we don't serve God according to our own imagination. Our own confession says good works are not what human beings imagine them to be. Just because you think something is a good work does not mean it is a good work. And just because you are going to devote yourself to the Lord doesn't mean you can do it any way you want to. Even if you're devoting yourself to the Lord, you have to do it on His terms. And it's a reminder that if you're going to live in the presence of God, even fully devoted, even especially devoted, sort of above and beyond the normal call of duty, it's still on God's terms. All right? And that's part of the reminder that is going on here. And actually, we'll see at the end that you actually have to, you thank God for the opportunity to be devoted to Him. It doesn't earn for you any extra favors. It actually costs you something to devote yourself to the Lord. Like you have to pay for the privilege of being fully devoted to the Lord above and beyond the call of duty. Because to be devoted to the Lord is a privilege that God allows you to enter into. And in fact, at the end, you're going to have to offer guilt sacrifices because you're not going to do it perfectly well. And so you're going to have to actually offer sacrifices to God at the end of it for the fact that you didn't do it as well as you promised to do it. But it fits again with, okay, so if you want to live in the present, if you want to be fully devoted to God, here's how you do it. And the Nazarite Vow then fits in with that. We'll also see that, like the other laws, remember we said that the other laws anticipate life in the land? That the laws are a functional promise. You know, again, think about the restitution law. Why do you have to make restitution to the priest? Well, if the person who you harmed is no longer living or can't be found, well, that doesn't happen on the way to the promised land. That happens after you've been established in the promised land for generations. And so the laws themselves are functional promises, and we'll see that the prohibition to partake of the vine, yes, it has something to do with alcohol, but we'll notice that actually more than alcohol is prohibited. It's all of the fruit of the vine. The fruit of the vine in particular was symbolic of establishment in the land. Because it took so long for a vine to bring forth fruit. And so again, there's a functional promise here. He's saying, listen, this is how you're going to live in the land when I'm amongst you, when I'm in your presence. And there's a promise that you are going to inhabit the land here. And we actually see something similar to that at the very end with the blessing at the very end, because that's where this is all headed. And so God's given them laws about how they can live as the people of God. But then in the end, He wraps it up with the other side of the covenant oath, which is what? You will be my people, and I will be your God. And so the chapter is going to end, these laws are going to end with this reminder that I will be your God. I will be the source of your blessing. I will be the fount of every blessing for the people who honor me as the Lord. So that's where we're headed. And so while it appears to us as sort of random at the beginning, we can begin to see sort of the logic of what's going on in the chapter. So let's dive in and look specifically first at the Nazarite Vow. All right. So again, there's three things that are going on here. So it says, "And the Lord," beginning in verse 1, "and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the people of Israel, say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes, fresh or dry. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins." All right? And so we have here sort of the beginnings of what the Nazarite vow is about. And what you notice is that it is, first of all, it is a vow of separation. All right? In fact, that's what the language of Nazarite means. Right? One who is separated unto the Lord. And so it is a vow of separation, and it is a voluntary vow. All right. Notice again, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow. All right. When when they desire to do this, when they want to make the vow. We'll come back to that at the end, actually, in verse 21, where it says, "Listen, if you want to go above and beyond what I've required of you, you're welcome to do that. Just if you promise something, you better do it." All right. But it's the emphasis on this is that this is voluntary. This is above and beyond the call of duty. This is not something that that everybody is required to do. So when would a Nazarite vow be appropriate? Like again, we think of examples like Samson, we think of examples like Samuel, but they're not normal Nazarite vows. I mean, those are vows where they were devoted by their parents before their birth, to the Lord for life. All right, the Nazarite vow was not that way normally. Normally, it is a season where you are going to separate yourself up to special devotion to the Lord for a time. Now, why? Why would someone want to do that? We're speculating here. So, why would someone want to do that? What do you think?
Someone's trying to figure out what job to take.
If I'm trying to figure out what job to take, yeah. No, I mean, we do that, right? We have seasons where we have big decisions, and maybe we have a season of prayer and fasting, and we might do something like that. We might have special devotion, a season of special devotion of more urgent prayer, or more urgent fasting, seeking the Lord's face. Certainly that's a possibility. Others?
I don't know, proceeding for some particularly egregious sin.
Trying to make, maybe we're trying to make up for a sin, like, we've done something. And there's no indication of that in the text, obviously, but again, it's a reason why someone might be motivated to do something like this, right? Maybe it's not an egregious sin as much as it is, but their hearts are grown cold, and they want to, go on a missions trip. They're not going to go somewhere else to do it. They don't have that idea of missions to the ends of the earth yet. That's a very New Testament idea. And yet, nevertheless, they may want to have a season of special devotion where they're like, hey, listen, my heart's running cold. I need to rekindle the fires. I've heard people talk about dedicating the first couple of years of their retirement to the Lord. Maybe someone wants to do that. I'm getting too old to farm. I don't want to just play golf all the time. We don't actually know. All right, we don't actually know, but we can imagine all kinds of reasons why someone might want to devote themselves, in a special way to the Lord. Not the normal, ordinary course of life. Obviously, in all of life, we all belong fully to God. Everything we do is in His service. We are stewards of the life that we have given. All of that is true, and yet we also understand that there is a way that we might, for a season, be especially devoted. Above and beyond. This is a special vow of service, a special vow of devotion. That in no way downplays the reality that everything we do is in the service of the Lord, but it also acknowledges the reality that for a season we might devote ourselves in some sort of special way that's outside of the norm. And God seems to be saying that's appropriate. All right? But as I was saying earlier, the fact that God stipulates how we do this is very instructive to us. Right? If we are going to devote ourselves to the Lord in a special way, it needs to be on His terms. Now, that doesn't mean we have to follow the exact Nazarite prescriptions that we get in the Old Testament. Right? But it does mean that we need to adhere to biblical principles, to biblical guidelines, if we are going to try to serve the Lord in a special way. If you're going to try to devote the first 2 years of your retirement to missions or to the Lord, if you're going to spend a season of special prayer and fasting as you anticipate a big decision, something like that, we worship God on His terms. Right? That was true in the Old Testament, and that is very clear here, but that principle doesn't go away. We continue to say, if we're going to devote ourselves to the Lord, we devote ourselves to Him on His terms. And so again, as we see here, it's a special vow. It's a voluntary vow, open to men or women. Men or women can do this. It's a voluntary vow that you enter into above and beyond the normal call of duty, and it is temporary. It's for a season. In fact, the whole second paragraph, or not the second paragraph, but the whole second section, beginning at verse 13, is about this is the law for the Nazarite when the time of his separation has been completed. The text anticipates that when you set yourself apart, it's a definite separation. It's not indefinite. It's not forever. It's not for life. All right? And so again, we're not told exactly why someone might want to do this, But I think the reasons we speculated make sense. But again, if we're going to do it, it's going to be on God's terms. And so the first requirement is what we read there, no fruit of the vine. So that's the first requirement. So no fruit of the vine. So that includes wine, strong drink, but it includes other stuff as well, right? It includes all fruit. All right. So I think both of those are significant. So there's an abstention from alcohol, and what might the symbolism of that be? Why might that be significant? Why, if you're devoting yourself to the Lord, might you abstain from alcohol? Okay, so that you're sober. All right. Why would that be important? All right. If you're doing the work of the Lord, you need to have your mind straight. Now, are only Nazarites told not to get drunk? So, Rick, that's kind of a standard rule, right? That's for everybody. Even the people who are allowed to drink strong drink are still not supposed to get drunk, right? And so this is not necessarily, it's not exclusively a prohibition against getting drunk. What else is wine and strong drink for?
Celebration.
It's for celebration, relaxing, right? A glass of wine at the end of the day to relax. The glass of wine at the party, it represents rest and celebration, right? And that's not what the Nazarite Vow is for. The Nazarite Vow is a season of devotion. You are devoting yourself to the Lord, all right? And so it's a season of work. You are separating yourself to the Lord in a special way. And so the wine and the strong drink, I think today, we tend to associate that with drunkenness. All right? But the prohibition against drunkenness was not limited to Nazarites. I mean, that was just across the board, even those who were allowed to drink strong drink. And so I think we have to see something deeper here, which is what wine and strong drink are rightfully for. Wine and strong drink are rightly for rest and celebration, and he's saying, no, that's not what the Nazarite's for. The Nazarite is a professional servant of the Lord. But what about the rest of it? Why all the fruit? You can't even eat the skins. You can't eat grapes, you can't eat raisins. I don't know, why would you want to eat the skins? We've discovered that Major has a very dexterous tongue, because if you put a grape in his mouth, he can spit out the skin. He knows anything that he doesn't like the texture of, he can get it out of his mouth. That's quite a skill. So he would definitely not want to eat the skins of grapes, but I guess that's something some people might be interested in. But what's going on there?
Well, if, as you said before, if grapes, the fruit of the vine, if that's actually symbolic of the entry into the land and the rest that God had promised his people, then in the same way that the not drinking alcohol is like, no, this is a time of work, not a time to rest, then to forego any of the fruit of the land is almost to say, I know that the full rest that God has promised has not yet arrived.
I think there's something to that. I think certainly there's something here about the vine in particular, in Old Testament imagery and Old Testament language, being particularly symbolic of a settled land. Like when you have vines, you are now settled. Like you have claimed the land. Because it takes years to develop a vine that actually produces fruit. So there's, like I said, the idea that they're going to have to refrain from the fruit of the vine is itself, an implied promise that they're going to be in the land. But there's also this idea that, hey, when you devote yourself to the Lord, you are adopting a pilgrim life for a time, where your homeland is in the Lord and not in the land for this season. And it's hard to get your mind around that exactly, but there's something going on there where your inheritance is in the Lord for this season in a way that it was for the Levites, their portion is the Lord. And a lot of this is actually very similar. It echoes some of the requirements for priests and some of the requirements for Levites. Some of the sacrifices that are offered are similar to the sacrifices you have. And in some sense, it's like, hey, you are temporarily taking on that the Lord is my portion mindset. That for this season, all that matters is the Lord. For this season, I'm setting aside my earthly concerns. I'm setting aside my normal vocations. I'm setting aside all that goes with that. And for this season, I am uniquely devoted to the Lord. And I think that's what we are. I think that's what we're supposed to be getting at when we see this idea that they are to refrain from the fruit of the vine. All right, so that's the first requirement. What's the second requirement? This is another one that we are familiar with. There in verse 5, he says, all the days of his vow, no razor shall touch his head, until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord. He shall be holy, and he shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow long. All right, so no haircut. All right, that's the second. Now, what's going on there? Any ideas? Why no haircut? We're not told, so we're guessing a little bit, but based on what we know of imagery elsewhere in the scriptures, what might be the significance of the fact that they don't cut their hair? Any ideas?
It's a visual symbol of separation that other people will recognize.
Okay, yeah. So if nothing else, it's a visible separator, right? You are not groomed like all the other men in Israel. Like it is a visible sign of your separation, right? And that's sort of at the minimum, right? It is that. Whatever else it is that, right? What else might it be? And again, we don't know here for sure. The language of the hair is actually very similar to the language the way hair is talked about is a crown, that this is God's sort of crown of glory on the person who is serving him for a time. That's possible. Another possibility, and again, it's a little bit hard because of the time difference between the time of Moses and the time of the New Testament, but hair, the long hair was a sign of being under authority in the New Testament. And it may be, that the man is uniquely under God's authority for the season. It's hard to know for sure. So we probably don't want to put too much weight on why the hair is long. And this is actually a good, just sort of exegetical principle. Like when we're working through the text, it's very tempting sometimes to try to force symbolic meaning on something that we don't actually know. And we just don't actually know. It's at the very least, Larry said, at the very least, it is a visible separator. It just is that, de facto. It is that by fact. If there's other symbolism here, if there's other significance here, we're not quite sure what it is. Yes?
I just did a quick search on razor, and it shows up again in Numbers 8. And it has to do with cleansing, with purification. Mm-hmm. So it could be, but do they start off with a shaved head?
No, not that we know of.
Okay, that's only at the end. Okay.
Yeah, so they shave their head at the end, and actually the hair gets offered to God as a sacrifice. Yeah. Which is kind of weird, but that's going to happen. We'll get there in just a minute. But the hair is actually going to be offered to God as a sacrifice at the end. And so, it's the shaving of the head at the end that makes us wonder about some of the vows that Paul was involved in Acts, because they involved shaved heads. But again, they're not called Nazarite vows in Acts, and we're not 100% sure what those vows were. But again, we assume there's significance to it. At the very least, it's visible. But then, like I said, I think we always need to err on the side of caution. If we don't have other good, clear biblical warrant for saying, hey, this is what this represented, it's best just to leave it in the realm of we don't know, to leave it in the realm of mystery. All right. And then what's the third category here? All right. So verse 6 there, he says, all the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body. not even for his father or for his mother, for brother or sister, if they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation to God is on his head. All right, so again, the idea that a dead body makes you unclean is not unique to Nazarites, right? That's common, right? And so if you came in contact with a dead body, you were unclean. Now, if your father died and you needed to bury him, you accepted that uncleanness and you went through the process, and then you went through the process of getting cleansed. And so what's unique here about the Nazarite vow is not just that they're supposed to avoid dead bodies, it's that they have to, even if it's their own father, all right? This is what's required of the high priest, right? The high priest is not allowed, if he's on duty and his father dies, he's not allowed to go to the funeral. He's not allowed to spoil himself, because he's devoted himself to a special work of the Lord. And this is telling us, listen, this is on par with that. It's not just that a dead body makes a Nazarite unclean. That's true for everybody. It's that a Nazarite must zealously guard his cleanliness, even to the sake of missing his father or his brother or his sister's funeral. If it comes to that, right? Because he has devoted himself to the Lord for this season. If you do not love me more than father or mother, that's the idea here. That's what the kind of thing that Jesus says to his disciples, and it's the kind of thing that is clear here about the Nazarites as well. You have devoted yourself to my service. That's not something that you do lightly. It's not something that you do willy-nilly. It's not something that you do on a whim. You need to be sure you understand what you're getting yourself into, because when you devote yourself to the Lord, it matters. So much so that look at the next paragraph. The next paragraph is telling. All right, he says, and if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles himself, so like you didn't go to a funeral, but you were sitting at lunch and the guy next to you has a heart attack. Right? That's the kind of situation that he's imagining here, right? This is not something you did voluntarily. It's something that happens to you, all right? So if any man dies very suddenly beside him, and he defiles his consecrated head, then he shall shave his head. So yeah, that's usually what comes at the end, but now he's got to do it mid-devotion. He shall shave his head on the day of his cleansing, and on the 7th day he shall shave it. On the 8th day he shall bring 2 turtle doves and 2 pigeons to the priest to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the priest shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering to make atonement for him. All right, this is regarded as a sin. Again, you broke your devotion to the Lord. Not necessarily, you didn't necessarily have any control over it whatsoever, and yet you broke your word to God. All right, and so you have to offer the sacrifices to make atonement. In fact, instead it says explicitly in verse 11, because he sinned by reason of the dead body. All right, just in case you missed it, because he sinned, because he broke his devotion to the Lord. Breaking your devotion to the Lord is a big deal. All right, and again, that's part of why you ought not to take vows. Don't use the name of the Lord in vain. Do not take vows that you are not in the power to keep. All right, and so we need to be very cautious before we promise what we're going to do. But again, notice that the time of the separation that is voided, and the implication here, it's not 100% clear, but the implication here is that he has to kind of start over. All right? So if you had devoted yourself to the Lord for 2 months, if you had devoted yourself to the Lord for 2 months, and 6 weeks in, the guy you have lunch with dies of a heart attack, you got to start over. All right? You got to go through the process again. All right, there's a story in not the scriptures, but I think it's in the Talmud, where some Queen Hilda or something, had devoted herself for 7 years, and of course, at the very end, she's defiled, and she has to start her 7 years all over again. But that's kind of the picture. Again, it's not stated clearly in the text, but that seems to be the implication is that if you devoted yourself for 2 months and you don't make it, you got to try again. This is not like our New Year's resolutions that we just forget about February and just don't pick up again. Like if you break it, you got to try again. You got to start up because you devoted yourself to to the Lord. And so, the idea again is that not only do we devote ourselves to God on His terms, but His terms are costly. If we are going to put ourselves into His service, it is a costly service that we are putting ourselves into. All right, but it is temporary. All right, so that's where the text picks up then at verse 13. Where it says, and this is the law for the Nazarite when the time of his separation has been completed. All right, and so what do they do when the time of separation is completed? And here, we continue to see that idea that this is a costly thing to devote yourself to the Lord. And so, does that mean the poor were excluded? Well, I'm not quite sure. In some of other passages, there are actually explicit provisions made for lesser sacrifices when someone is too poor for the sacrifices that are offered. And so it's possible that's just assumed here. It's possible also that maybe the poor who can't afford it need a sponsor. I mean, one of the things that we actually see in the book of Acts is one person paying another person's expenses for their vows. And so maybe it's something where those who had more resources, made it possible for those who didn't to offer. Again, we're not told. We don't know exactly how. Given what we know about the rest of the laws, it seems difficult to believe that the poor would just be excluded from this. So I think we can safely assume that there were some provisions made for the poor to participate in the Nazarite vow. We just don't know what those provisions were, whether that was someone else paying their expenses or whether there were actually lesser expenses for the poor. We're not told here. But remember, the laws that we saw in chapter 5, a lot of them were repeated elsewhere. And it's possible that there was a tradition, even if it's not recorded for us in Scripture, about sort of a lesser cost for those who are poor. But the costs that are stated here are pretty substantial. All right, so there's a male lamb for a burnt offering. All right, a ewe lamb for a sin offering, and then another ram for a peace offering, as well as grain and drink offerings. And so, 3 lambs, this is an expensive offering. This is a big deal to have 3 lambs offered at the end. All right, and again, think about what's implied there. So you have a burnt offering, a sin offering, and a peace offering. So the burnt offering, remember, is all of these offerings are offerings that make atonement. All these offerings are offerings that restore significance, but they have different symbolism, right? So the burnt offering, the whole burnt offering, is an image of all-out devotion. All right, so it's a reminder as he comes to the end of this that yes, he's leaving his Nazarite vows, but he's still fully devoted to the Lord. This particular season of devotion is being set aside, and it's come to an end. But as we were saying earlier, everybody is fully devoted to the Lord. That's what the whole burnt offering is about. And so this particular season is over, but my full devotion to the Lord is not. The second offering is a sin offering, which again, one of the confession we used this past Sunday talked about, our repentance needing to be repented of and our tears needing to be washed, right? That even when we come before the God confessing our sins, even those actions are themselves mixed with sin. Our best efforts are less than they're supposed to be, and even our most devoted acts of coming into God's presence fall short of what God deserves. And so even the Nazarite is offering a sin offering at the end of his service, which is telling. It's just a reminder to us that these acts do not earn God favor with God. All right, even these acts, even at the end of these acts, even at the end of these seasons, we have to bring a sin offering. But then there's also the peace offering, which always comes at the end of these offerings. Because again, remember, the peace offering is a celebration of the relationship that has been reestablished. That's what atonement is about. It's a reestablishing of the at-one-ment. I mean, that's actually a good way to think about what atonement is. It is the reestablishment of the right relationship. And so you have devoted yourself in the burnt offering. You have made it. You have the forgiveness of sins through the sin offering, And then you celebrate the newly restored relationship in the peace offering. Well, part of what we notice here is that the peace offering here is actually a little bit different than the peace offering that we give in the book of Leviticus. All right? So when you offer a peace offering at the end of the Nazarite vow, you give an extra portion. In this case, it's the shoulder. You give an extra portion to the priest. So that the priest is getting even more than normal. Which again, we can wrestle with what the significance of that is, but it seems to be sort of an extra expression of gratitude to God for allowing you to serve Him. Right? That's what the grain offerings and the drink offerings seem to represent. Like, so far from us sort of indebting God to ourselves, we are indebted to God when He allows us to serve Him. It is His grace to us that calls us into His service. A call to be His slave is a gift. And we have that language all throughout the New Testament, right? We are graced to be called into His service. You think about the way Paul talks about his own calling as an apostle. It is a gift to be called into His service, but we need to be constantly reminding ourselves of that. That God, in His grace, gives us work to do that has value in His kingdom. That is a gift, beyond imagining that God says, yes, I'm going to give you a role to play. I use this illustration all the time, but I think it's worth repeating because it's something that kind of comes into my brain over and over and over again. But I jokingly say it only takes twice as long to clean up the kitchen if you let your kids help. Right? It only takes twice as long to do a project at home if you let your kids. I don't ever do that one, but letting your kids help doesn't make things go faster. Why do you do it? Because you delight to bring them into the work that you are doing. It's a gift to them. It is a gift to them. They don't always treat it as such, even as we don't always treat God calling us into His service as such. Sometimes they're so self-absorbed and so concerned about other things that they're bitter about your giving them an opportunity to participate in the work of the household. And yet we still recognize it's a gift to them to allow them to do work that matters. Even if you have to come alongside them, even if you have to sort of correct it when you're done. And God does that with us. God is building His kingdom. He is doing His work. And He invites us in and He gives us a role to play. And He even allows us to volunteer for special service. Special work, whatever it is. Whether it's a time of contemplation, a time of seeking, a time of mission trip, whatever it is. He even allows us to do that. In the service of His kingdom. And so when you get to the peace offering here, it's actually above and beyond. It's an expression of gratitude that God has allowed you to participate in this season of devotion. Of course, so you have those offerings. Then, of course, you have the shaving of the head, which is, like I said, the hair is actually offered with the grain offerings and stuff at this point. So the hair, whatever it represented earlier, remember we said we weren't quite sure what exactly the hair represented, but it's shaved off at this point, and it is devoted to the Lord, which again would be a clear, at the very least, it's a clear sign that his season of separation is over. Right? If the long hair was evidence that the season of separation was active, the shaved head was evidence that was a sign that the season of separation was over. And then we're told at the very end, and if you want to do more than this, you're welcome to. Just if you promise it, you better do it. That's kind of the sign with the last word being, and after that, the Nazarite may drink wine. If he's ready to go back and celebrate, now's the time. This is the time to have a glass of wine, to relax or to celebrate, to feast before the Lord. And so, we've been kind of alluding to it along the way, but as you reflect on these Nazarite vows, what do you think we're meant to learn from them as Christians today, in the church today? What do you take away from these vows?
It
don't show the separateness of God. I mean, the holiness of God, just how it kind of, it's an imperfect mirror of that separation. And it kind of, I would expect it would teach the person undergoing these vows that separation as well. You know, maybe they don't understand it and that's why they're doing it. Who knows?
Yeah.
But,
Okay. Yeah, certainly the very fact that God has rules for how you can serve Him reminds us of His holiness. You know, and again, that's still true for us today. I mean, we don't follow these exact prescriptions. These ceremonial laws are not binding on believers today. We don't have Nazarite vows today, but nevertheless, there is still that reality that if we're going to serve God, it has to be on His terms. I think certainly there's that. Anyone else? Anything else?
Vows have weight.
Vows have weight, yeah. When we think about do not use the name of the Lord in vain, I think we mostly think about it wrongly. At least kids do today. They think of curse words, right? They think of certain phrases you're not supposed to use. That is not what the third commandment is primarily about. The third commandment is first about living life worthy of the name of the Lord. Don't take the name of God upon you in a vain way, But it is secondly upon don't use the name of the Lord, to add weight to your words and then not follow through. If you call God as a witness, it is a weighty thing. Vows have weight; they are to be paid. Pay your vows to the Lord. If you swear before God, and that is a weighty thing for sure. I think one application, at least for us, in our tradition. I know not all of you have a long generational Presbyterian tradition and all that, but in our tradition, there's a huge emphasis upon the idea of vocation and upon the idea of we even confessed it this last night, the regular use of the ordinary means of grace, right? So Michael Horton has a book called Ordinary, where he talks about just the ordinary nature of the Christian life. And there's something exactly right about that. But when we do that, we sometimes disparage the special. And we're like, okay, there's no place for a mountaintop experience, or there's no place for a special act of devotion, or there's no place for prayer and fasting, because we're always devoted to the Lord. And I think if we go there, we're going somewhere Scripture doesn't go. Scripture has prescriptions here for people who were belonged fully to the Lord. They were the Lord's. They were fully devoted to Him. That's what the whole burnt offering was all about. And yet there's a special devotion. And I think it's a reminder to us, there's a place for this in the Christian life. There's a place for this for special seasons of contemplation, or for special seasons of prayer and fasting where you're seeking the Lord, or for special seasons of service, where you're saying, okay, Lord, after college I'm giving you a year. We're not Mormons, but that's not a bad thing to do. If you want to give, my sister did something like this when after her college experience. She was like, you know what, she was what's it called, Impact or something, 2-year missionary with MTW. She wasn't saying she was going to be a missionary for life. That was never her intention. But she's like, I'm going to do this for 2 years. And she was going to go work with orphans in somewhere in. She wanted to go to Kenya. She ended up in South Africa. And that's where she got married. So it worked out. But there's a place for that. There's a place for that kind of special devotion. And I think, like I said, in our traditions, we sometimes push against that. So emphasizing just sort of the fact that in the ordinary course of life, we are devoted to the Lord. Right? And that's, of course, right. We are fully devoted to the Lord. Everything we do is in His service. We talk about it every Sunday, that when we give the first fruits back to God, we are declaring that the whole harvest is His. I mean, that is true of our money. That is true of every aspect of our lives, right? We devote to God the first fruits because the whole harvest is His. And yet there's still a place for these special acts of devotion. There's a place for when I was at Covenant, I'm sure it was still there when you were there, Sam. Once a semester they gave you a day of prayer. A day where you just sit inside. You got to take off your ordinary classes. and you got to devote the whole day to a day of prayer. That's not something you get to do in the course of ordinary life very often, right? And at least in my experience, it was a tremendous thing. You just don't get to do that very often. Where you have a whole day off from all of your ordinary duties and responsibilities and schedules, and you get to spend a day in prayer. And so there's a place for that kind of thing. And of course, I think most Nazarite vows are more than a day. The fact that your hair, you can tell the hair tells you that probably we're talking about something that's weeks or months here. But nevertheless. A time of special devotion. Anything else? Any other kind of insights that you would take from these Nazarite vows?
I love that while it shows definitely that God is separate and holy, and there are clear, prescriptive ways of going about it, there's still the invitation, there's still even the opportunity to come near.
Yeah. And it's open to everyone. A man or woman who wants to take the vow. I think that's a profound thing that God says. Listen, anyone and everyone. If you want, here's the road. Again, you have to do it on my terms, but here's the road if you want to take it. So, others.
I think it removes them from the civil authority too, right? Because you can't be a soldier very well in this sort of circumstance, and the long hair probably cuts against that too. But
yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you are. It's like a priest. I think. I think the parallels with the separations of priests and Levites is intentional. They're not exact, but there's a lot of overlap between what a priest can do and what's required of a priest, what's required of a Nazarite. And of course, the Nazarite is the layman doing it temporarily, but still, the assumption is that the same type of exclusions, like, hey, yeah, you are devoted to the Lord for this season, which means you're probably not engaged in all the normal affairs of life, which is part of why it's a gift. Because if you stop pulling your weight in the community, then you're a liability at that point. From that perspective, and someone else is having to cover for you. All right, so it's a gift that you're able to do this.
So what do you mean by not pulling your weight? I don't see anything where they couldn't still work.
Yeah, we don't know exactly, but if it's an act of special service, and that's the language of service. Yeah. Again, we don't know for sure what they were doing. So, but the imagination is like things like military service and other aspects probably were. There's probably some exemption from those. That's an assumption, but it's a fairly common assumption as far as what Nazarites did. Yeah, but you're right. There's not a prescription that they weren't necessarily working, but something's different.
This just kind of, for me, begs the question: why would anyone want to do this? It sounds like the risk is huge.
Yeah.
Screw it up, and you're going to call down the wrath of God on yourself.
Yeah, why would anybody want to do this? And again, that's part of the idea that it's the privilege. Maybe again, it's a season. I think the parallel with monks and nuns, is a valuable one in some ways because we, again, as Protestants, we're well aware of some of the abuses that came with those systems, the monastic systems, but the idea of going off for a season, really for contemplation, and for prayer and for devotion, there's great value in that. And so it may be maybe a risk someone's worth taking, that maybe their heart's grown cold and they need to go off, to pray and to worship and to focus just for a season. Again, we're not given enough details to be real specific as to exactly how these vows were used. Like I said, the fact that they're mentioned in Amos means that they were still being used, and it appears that at least some version of them are still in effect even in Jesus' day. But we're not given a lot of clear evidence as to what they were used for. Or at least I didn't read it. I didn't read anybody who was saying they knew exactly what they were for.
It doesn't seem the same as fasting or the Sabbath, because those are like rest, and this is really about service or work.
Yeah, this is not that. In fact, I think the exclusion of wine, wine which is for resting and celebrating, this is clearly distinguished from that. This is not that. This is work. But it's work. It's a special work in the service of the Lord. And the service is the word that's used. You're separating yourself to the service of the Lord for a season.
Is there any indication of how many people, what
Yeah.
percentage?
Again, not that I'm aware of. I don't know for sure. But again, the fact that they were recognized, the fact that it was sort of a game in Amos's day to try to get him to trip up, tells you that it wasn't entirely rare, but I don't really have any idea how many. I don't have time to get into the benediction tonight, and it's just way too rich to try to rush through. So we will start there next week and then move into chapter 7. But yeah, we will pick up with the Aaronic blessing at the end of chapter 6. But let me just end with kind of what that symbolizes, because we've been looking at all of this has been about what do we do? What do the people of God do to honor God as their God, right? And it is, as Scott was saying, this is weighty stuff. I mean, this is heavy. This is not easy. The language that the commentaries use over and over again is just how costly this is. This is costly. If you're doing this is costly. It's costly social-wise. It's costly material-wise. It's a costly endeavor to serve the living God. In fact, Jesus says it's about costing you everything, all right, to follow him. All right, but that's part of the implication here. But then the promise comes at the end, and God says, you will be my people. And this is what you have to do if you're going to be my people, but I will be your God. And that is the reward. And we'll see it in the language of the benediction, but that is the reward that makes every sacrifice negligible. That allows us to count every cost as nothing. Even the cost of our lives is nothing compared to the gift, because what God is giving us ultimately is himself in this blessing. So we'll pick up there next week. Let me end there. Let me pray. Father, we thank you again for your word. We thank you for these Nazarite vows. We confess that they are a bit befuddling to us, confusing to us. We don't understand all the details. We don't understand all the reasons for why this and not that. But Father, we recognize in it the heart of someone who wants to devote themselves to you. We recognize that in itself is an honorable thing. Father, may we both serve you in the course of our ordinary lives, and may we at times devote ourselves to special service, all to the praise of your glory.